Have you ever imagined your own funeral? Who will do the eulogy? Who will be the pallbearers? Who will attend or even care? I attended my own funeral. Let me explain. But before I do, I need to disclose that no one died or was injured in the making of the speech. On a typical day where I was happily playing solitaire and checking out Facebook at work, I got the call. June 6th, the anniversary of D-Day. Not World War II, displacement day. The day my 23-year job was eliminated. Just like that. It was all over. Hard work, tenure, and skills had nothing to do with this cost-cutting decision. Was I curious that my first thought wasn't to call my wife, but that I had to find a new Toastmasters club? On my ride to work on that fateful day, a news report announced 175,000 new jobs in the U.S., making the unemployment rate 7.6%. On my ride home, I was on the other side, one of the 11.7 million unemployed. To grasp the magnitude, take the entire population of New York City, then add 4 million people. The call was like a shot to the head. I was being put to rest and people were preparing for my funeral. Condolences rolled in, hugs happened, tears flew. How will people see you when you're gone? An old manager once asked if I ran through a wall, would people follow? At the time, I didn't know the answer. I needed to know the answer. That was a lifeline, a call to action. Fast forward 6 years later. I don't recall a more calming day. A day of self-reflection, a chance to hover over my dead body and ask, was my life and career a success? The notes flooded in. Tom, you touched me. Personally, professionally, more than you'll ever know. Tom, we love you. This is your next speech. I ran through a wall, and people followed. But how was I going to tell my 3 daughters that Dad was being sent to the farm just like his childhood dog? The spending freeze on shoes, clothes, and pizza is worse than death to teenagers. My middle child's head tilted at a mourner's angle as a tear slowly rolled down her cheek as if to fall on my casket. My youngest held me in a bear hug as if it was the last time ever. My social media conscious 16-year-old told me that all responses to the relocation question on Facebook was, no. As if I had a choice. The denial, the anger, the acceptance. The exhaustive feeling of having my family watch my own demise. But my support system refused to let the last nail go into the coffin as they put in a crowbar made of emails, phone calls, and leads. I was being resuscitated. How many of you have a will prepared? A will reduces stress and chaos. The run through the wall question 6 years earlier had been my wake-up call. I didn't realize how it would prevent my professional passing. My eyes were wide open as I built an extraordinary career-saving and life-changing network. In Keith Ferrazzi's book, Never Eat Alone, he notes, build it before you need it. Real relationships built over the years provided me meaning and are the reason for my success. I wasn't 6 feet under. I was 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon. Or at least my next big leap. I wasn't flatlined. I was alive, and my support system was my CPR. My job loss was a celebration of life, not a funeral. It reminded me how deep my love and appreciation really are for my family, friends, and network. I wasn't defined by my job. I defined my own life and was going to do my funeral my way. No, I'm not going to belt out Sinatra. I lost my job, but I found me. I used my displacement as a reaffirmation that when I leave this earth, I'm leaving with no regrets. Think about your own funeral. When your spirit's hovering over the mourners, did you give them something to mourn about? That didn't come out right. let's go back to the original question. Have you ever imagined your own funeral? Who will do the eulogy? Who will be your pallbearers? Who will attend or even care? My eulogy was shouted out by the many key people in my network who blew my trumpet with humbling accounts of who I was and had become. My pallbearers carried me when I couldn't go any further. The overwhelming flood of notes and messages showed who cared. I have to admit, I started writing the speech immediately after I got the call, including the ending. We all know we're going to die. Not that ending. The speech ending. The one where I secured a job. It wasn't overconfidence. Just belief in an ironclad network that refused to stop giving me oxygen. Are you ready to see your own funeral? I saw mine. And it was beautiful. I always get some interesting looks when I say my funeral and networking together. As I mentioned before, I lost my job a year ago today. And couldn't be more thankful. And let me explain why. But before I do, I'm going to mention, regardless of how good this discussion is today or how bad, 50% of you are going to look around and say, that was nice, and do nothing about it. 45% of you are going to walk out of here and say, you know what, you're probably right. And either think about getting started or start but not necessarily finish. And then 5% of you are going to say, you know what, I need to change what I'm doing when it comes to networking. And it may change the course of your life and career. I lost my job and I found one 59 days later. And I blame networking. In my previous job, where I was there for 23 years, I averaged 18 months of position. I couldn't keep a job. That's actually a good thing, by the way. And I blame networking. I get calls out of the blue periodically on a regular basis, at least once a month, for speaking engagements, to come start up some job, to help people out, to do things that I would have never dreamed of before. And I blame networking. I've never been happier, more satisfied in my 24 years of professional living than I am right now. And I blame networking. So let's talk about what is networking. Because we've talked about it all day. From 8 to 9, we had coffee, and it was networking. What is networking?
It's making connections.
Making connections. What else?
Asking questions.
Asking questions, being curious, absolutely.
Finding things in common with one another.
Finding a common connection, absolutely.
Fostering relationships with folks.
Fostering relationships and building upon those relationships. And then we're going to talk a little bit later about what networking is now. How many of you are self-employed? Anybody? Just trying to understand the audience mix. How many of you work for a small business, large business, university? And you all those answers. Does it start with USM? For those that are self-employed, networking will lead to and drive customers, clients, and potential recruits. Even in the university or small companies or big companies, we are kidding ourselves if we don't think people are sitting around the table or sitting by the water cooler talking about us who can or may or will impact your next career. Kidding ourselves. That's some of the things I want you to walk away with from today. The other things we're going to reinforce is that you drive your own career. An opportunity seldom labels itself. Networking builds exponentially. So think about it as money in the bank. You want to let it do some work for you. And finally, many of us are living in this old hierarchy. And what I mean by that is it's this vertical hierarchy. We think networking a lot of times is if I'm in good with my boss and my boss's boss, and we're in pretty good shape. Organizations have flat. Do more with less,
cross-functional. It's much more horizontal than it ever has been. That's networking internally. And then outside, we need to start thinking in terms of who we can talk to that can influence us around us. And what I mean by that is we have an opportunity to think beyond what we're currently thinking of right now. I almost said think out of the box, but it's so cliche. The other thing I want you to walk away with is it's not as hard as you think. And some people, it is a complete roadblock. It is a wall that is put up. And it's tough on them. We have this societal willingness to stand behind our computer, our screen. Guess how many people worldwide are in Facebook? As of last month. The closest billion would be fine.
8 billion?
1.3 billion. How many people are on LinkedIn worldwide as of last month? Closer. It's over 300 million.
Yeah.
It's over so we have this societal willingness to social media, to be on social media and connect with people, and let's see who can get the most connections and who can get the most friends and all those connections. And is that really networking? It is when you take a picture of what you had for dinner last night. But ask yourself, is that really networking? And yes, it's social networking. You get to share pictures and family and friends and professional accomplishments and all those things. And that is coming back to what Dr. Pilot had talked about this morning. There is synergy behind technology in making real life connections because it becomes that medium. It becomes your platform. It becomes your means of potentially connecting with that individual when you may not have, when you didn't have it before. And I am extremely thankful that I lost my job last year and not many years before that, because I'm not sure what I would have done when it comes to networking. So there's this Harvard Business Review that was written a couple of years ago on networking. And the first paragraph started with a story about William Dawes. Who's William Dawes? He's really almost famous. Well, see, he was given some instructions with another individual. And those instructions were, can you please go tell the people that the Revolutionary War started? Well, William went south. A guy by the name of Paul Revere went north. Who was the better networker? William who? And it's a good illustration of, not just to become famous, but it's a good illustration of how connections can work for you. How many of you have a formal mentor? A couple of you? Okay, I'll come to and pick on the people that raise their hands. How many of you have met with that mentor in the last 30 days? Okay. What's mentoring have to do with networking?
It expands your network if you have connections with your mentor.
If you do it right. This is someone who is providing you guidance and assurance and opinions, and yes, they are absolutely a key piece of your network. They can also provide names of people of other groups that you can meet with. So you can expand your network if you use your mentor correctly. And I will also tell you to fire your mentor 6 months from now. And why did I say fire your mentor? If you don't have one, get one. And then fire them 6 months later. And why do I say that?
Because you need more than one mentor. Because if you've learned what you can from one person, you can still continue to get support from that person, but they'll learn new things or new skills or new ideas from other mentors.
In a conversation we were just having about engage and disengage, at some point you're going to hit a plateau when it comes to your mentor, and then it just becomes a social situation. Now you're just sharing stories of what's recently happened. And you're not getting the advice, but that's okay. So fire them 6 months from now, and what you get is an informal mentor. They don't go away. When I lost my job, I didn't shut the door and never speak to them again. I just built my network bigger. That's a beautiful thing. Make your network bigger. And it's not about volume, it's about quality, but get another mentor, a formal mentor that you can meet with over the next several months. And now you have 2 people. And you can ask them, who else can I meet? And then you probably have 16. And then 18 people, then 24 people, and all of a sudden this thing grows exponentially. So as we're coming into network today, how many of you sat at the same table you did for the morning session as you did for the afternoon? And I will raise my hand because I did. That's good. Now there's a reason why I did that. Because everyone else around me left. I don't know. Hold on a second. So I got to talk to some new people in both sessions. And so I'm building my network a little bit, I think, maybe, because maybe I got some business cards, maybe I got some names, maybe I handed mine out to a couple people, and maybe that's network. Handing over a business card is not network. So I sat down with the boss, and this is how your network can grow exponentially. And my boss says, okay, it's performance appraisal time, let's talk about the last couple months that you've had. And I said, why are the reports never on time and why are they never right? He said, I don't know. Why don't you go find out on a 90-day task force? And so I went from managing 150 people to managing 4. And I was overseeing the reporting that impacted 3,500 people. We were working on the compensation plans, the incentive plans that impacted 3,500 people. And we could have just handed them out, emailed them, and off we went. But the impact that that could have on the overall value we were adding or influencing performance wouldn't have been there. We had to talk to the people that were going through it. We had to talk to the people that had to execute it and perform and figure out what it means to them financially. We had to talk to the managers that had to communicate that to them on a regular basis. We had to talk to HR. We had no choice but the 5 of us to network with 10 different sites across the entire country. So we had no choice. And they said, Tom, this went on for, that 90-day task force lasted 2 years, by the way. So it became a full-time engagement, and I started to realize that my influence through networking was on 3,500 people, not just my manager or my managing manager. And so I started to get a little bit of taste of what networking was during that time, and they said, Tom, we'd love to have you go down to Rhode Island. There's 2 positions open right now. Each one of those would manage 750 people. And I can get back into managing, which I was kind of hoping I'd get back into. So I sat there for 8 hours in a grueling set of interviews, and I finished, and I thought things went extremely well. And the guy comes up and calls me with the decision, and he said, Tom, guess what? We hired 2 people. Guess what number I was?
Number 3.
Tom, you had a great interview. You had strategy, you had vision, we loved the experience that you had, and you had no idea who you are. We don't know who your boss is. We don't even know your boss's boss, because at the time our company had gone from 28,000 to 300,000 overnight after we were acquired. So we still had a lot of movement going on over that last year, and nobody knew who anyone was. So they hired the 2 people that had a little bit more experience than I did, but they hired them because they knew them. And so my response back to him was, thank you so much, I appreciate your honesty, and what are you doing 2 weeks from now? And he said, I don't know. I said, do you have time to speak to me? And we spent 2 weeks later just a half hour together. And he got to know me, and I got to know him. It had nothing to do with the open position because it was no longer open. He called me up 6 months later and said, guess what? One of the people left. So I told you should have hired him. He said, no interview needed, it's yours. And I said, no, thank you. Because I had just heard the week before in the hallway a conversation that was going on that said, we have, of these 3,500 people, a major attrition problem. 45% of all people were leaving the company within a year.
Wow.
No, it was not my incentive plan or reporting costs. 45%. And they said, we're not sure what to do. We're thinking about putting somebody there on a task force. They said, oh, I love task forces. Put me on. 1-person task force to clean up the mess of 3,500 people. In reality, it was to clean up the mess of the 30,000 people that were in the various call centers that were there because they were having similar issues. I didn't have a choice again but to network. And so I started to speak to HR, to compensation, to the people who were leaving, to the people who were staying, to the managers who, by the way, were the root cause. Because people don't leave their company. People leave their manager. But it took conversations, not just with people within the company. I was talking to experts outside the field. I was reading books. I was networking. And all of a sudden, I was finding success. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. We were having success because one person can't clean the problem. And the purpose of this story is to teach you that networking is more about a bigger vision than just your success. I happened to find some, but it was a we thing. It wasn't a me thing. And that success came when I started networking. Guess what? Networking is just as important to talk to people that can help you put out fires and to solve problems as it is to look for your next career. So I ended up getting a new boss. And I started doing another position, and this boss says to me, okay, it's performance appraisal time again. And I want to share a story with you. Because my mentor called and shared this story. So there was a bunch of people sitting around the table, and the mentor of Kathy says to her, your next career move was brought up into a conversation, and they were sitting around talking about the annual, what they call talent planning session, and figure out the next moves for people. And your name, Kathy, came up, and your manager did this. And I will ask all of you, are all your eggs in that basket? And she said, nobody knows why. Not sure if it was a bad hair day. Not sure if she didn't like you, didn't like your style, didn't like you. So the mentor let it go on for a couple seconds, complete silence. And she said, okay, if you're not going to talk about her, I will. I mentor with her, and here are the great things about her, here are the things she needs to work on, and here's why I think she will be a good fit in this next role. And all of a sudden, people around the table said, oh yeah, I know who Kathy is, and all of a sudden this conversation gets moving because she was an effective networker. I had a very similar situation after I had learned the power of networking, where I had one of my managers, and I told you I averaged 18 months of position for 23 years, I had a lot of managers. And this manager got into one of those sessions, and my name came up, and she said, you don't want to work for Tom. He's a complainer. He's cynical. Questions everything. One of my former managers said, interesting, because I would take him anywhere. And the reason I would is because he's curious. He asks the right questions, and he cleans up problems. You call that complaining. And another person said, yeah, I've seen that growth in him. And so it went around the table. All of that comment, by the way, that one comment was based off of something that I had said to her 2 weeks earlier when I was having problems with a colleague, and I asked her simply, what can I do to help this relationship with this colleague that I don't seem to be getting along with? What can I do to solve the problem? And it turned into constant complaining. And so if all of my eggs would have been in that basket, which they have been in the many years before, I would have been in trouble. So Kathy comes back after the mentor story, and she says, okay, the next day we're sitting around the table, and guess what, Tom? Your name came up, and there's 15 people sitting around the table. Here's who they are. How many of them do you know? And a lot of them had come from my own company. I said, oh, that's easy. 12. Yep, I know 12. She said, how many of those 12 could you pick up the phone and call, and they would know you, and you would know them, and all of a sudden you can talk about the things that you can do well for them and that you can work together, and all of a sudden I said, oh, 3. So of those 15 people, there were 12 sitting around the table responsible for my next career move. And I didn't know them, and they didn't know me. Usually happens with nothing, or not something I would appreciate further on in my career. And her only words to me were, Tom, you have some work to do. So that was 6 years ago. 6 years ago, I started meeting with one person once a month for 30 minutes. I spent 15 minutes a month putting together my preparation questions, and I spent 30 minutes with an individual I don't know. And I started with people that were 2 levels above me. And why would I do that? Why 2 levels above me?
You probably have more power in hiring decisions.
Okay, more power in the hiring decisions. Absolutely, more contacts typically.
They hire the level above you.
Mm-hmm. And part of it was I needed to put myself out of my comfort zone. I am, in the present tense, painfully shy and introverted. And I needed to put myself outside of my comfort zone. And it actually taught me to be more confident. Because I was talking to a bunch of people, and they were at this level. But think about it, this is the level, they are the decision makers. If I meet with people that are my peers, what am I doing? I'm working. I'm not networking. That's your job. When I go one level above, I'm probably still getting some work done. But it may also be your competition for your next position. And I found that's not really networking. That's just getting things done. And so I really didn't consider that networking. I did a lot of it. But my true networking wasn't until I realized that I've got to find people that can influence myself and that I can influence, that can help move this thing along. And Kathy said, I want you to meet with Ben. And Ben's in HR. Now, why would they tell you to meet with someone from HR?
Because they know about new positions that will be opening up.
So HR has this view of what's open, what's not, what you're good at, what you're not, and they have this global view of the organization, this umbrella view that your manager or your manager's manager may not have. So I speak to Ben, and Ben, things went extremely well with them, and the next month I met with a guy named Ted. He oversaw training and leadership development, and same reason, except he was the one sitting at the table organizing these meetings. So I was talking to the person that was organizing, so when my name came up, he's like, oh yeah, I talked to him too. He has that view. He and she, it was a he at that time, but I've talked to many he's and she's, and they have this view that is much bigger and can give you this global perspective, and it gives you a perspective that you wouldn't have had if you don't speak to them. So anytime I go to a new position or a new role, the first people I seek out are those that are part of the leadership and those that are part of the HR. And I speak to them. And I started to get kind of comfortable with this process after a while. And I said, I no longer have to go 2 levels above because I'm starting to get a little bit more confidence. But what I started to do is go back to people that I hadn't seen in years. Now, why would I do something crazy like that? Things change.
Reinvigorate your relationship with them.
Reinvigorate. And I like to call it reinvent myself. Because I had this reputation. Okay, so the person was right at one point. I used to be cynical, used to be defensive. And I had this reputation of rolling up the sleeves, getting the job done, and being the doer. And so I had worked for this person for a couple of years. She was a great individual. I loved working for her. But my reputation for her was he will always get the job done. I will take him anywhere, but I don't ever see him as a leader. So I said to her, what do I have to do to stop moving laterally, place to place to place, and start moving up? And so what we did during that time is I no longer had to introduce myself and get past the pleasantries. And so the pleasantries went away, and now we had a deeper conversation in that 30 minutes. And I said to her, what do I need to do to move up? And she said, you need to stop being a doer and start being a leader. And I said, how? And she shared it. And bam, it hit me square between the eyes. And all I did was change a couple little things. Because I was still there to support the work of the people that I was there. I was willing to roll up my sleeves, but I started riding the coattails of others. I pushed credit on others, and all of a sudden I started to find a little bit more success because that person told me what I needed to hear, but probably wouldn't have gotten from anyone else out there. As I was looking for a job, and when I lost my job on June 6th last year, I walked out the door with phone in hand, and I made my first phone call to someone I had ironically called the day before. Or had called me the day before and offered me a job. They were kidding. They said, oh, you should come work for us. But I said, hey, remember that question you had? Drove up the road 1,000 yards to a call center where I had managed in the past and talked to an old manager who was overseeing this organization. I said, hey, lost my job today. Got any openings? And then all the emails went out, LinkedIn connections went out, and all of a sudden, my first, 200 emails and all that other fun stuff that goes along with it was, I lost my job, do you have any openings? You know what I got with that? A lot of sympathy, a lot of support, and I appreciate that. But if I heard for every door that closes, another window opens. Sorry, counselors. I appreciate the sentiment, I appreciate the support, I appreciate the fact that anyone was willing to have the conversation with me, but I wanted to get past the sympathy and have a real life conversation. And what I learned that networking was all about building relationships. It's about finding the connections. It is not what's in it for me. It's what's in it for you. So in my introduction, I said, yep, I lost my job, but I really want to know about you, about your organization. What have you done? What do you like about it? Tell me about the culture. Tell me about the things and all about you. And I don't care if you have any openings or not. Because it wasn't about the openings. Because I know, and it has been proven statistically, research will tell you 80 to 85% of all job hires are based off of who you know. So if you don't have an opening now, you may have one later. And so I started to have these conversations, and I twisted it, and it no longer became about me, it became about them. And my introductory emails, the phone calls I made, whatever it was to make a mutual relationship deeper than it ever was. And it became this easily fun conversation that I was having with people, because now I'm just connecting. And I no longer have to worry about finding a job. The job will come to me if I do the things that are right. So Kathy says to me, 6 months later, how's Ben? I don't know. When's the last time you talked to him? When I networked with him? How's Ted? I don't know. When's the last time you spoke to him? 6 months ago. Are you really networking? And I was checking off a box, because networking to me was checking off a box. So let's talk about what networking is not. Networking is not checking off a box. It is not kissing up. And not everything has to be up, but that's how I started to get myself out of my comfort level to say it's not that hard. It's not about collecting the most business cards. It's not about handing out the most business cards. It is not about the most connections on LinkedIn or the most friends on Facebook. It is about building a mutual relationship that you can both get something from. And it becomes a selfless relationship, because now it just becomes a conversation. Got an email yesterday from someone who said, I just lost my job. Someone I had reached out to a year ago today. And they said, if you have any openings, let me know. And I said, okay, let me provide you some feedback that I have. One, stop asking about openings and start saying, what can we do to meet? You never asked me to meet in your email, or to place a phone call or anything. You didn't ask to network. That's where your value comes. And then we started talking about the things that he can do to build that network. And I said, I love the company I'm with. Here are some contacts, because I know what field you're trying to get into. And all of a sudden we started to build that relationship. And I know him, and we're working through it. That's what it is. Networking is to allow you to maneuver through the complexities of an organization or a culture. It helps you to build relationships so you can help put out fires. It starts to build supporting bridges. It allows you to find touch points. It allows you to have influence. It allows you to contact people that are decision makers. It allows people to get to know who you are. And so all of a sudden, reputation Tom of being stoic, straight up and down, uptight, run down the hall, get things done, turned into personable, easy to talk to, conversationalist, confident. Who, me? I said, yeah, because of networking. And so you're creating your own perception by building your network and building your perception. So I started, after Ben and Ted, to start asking all the questions I needed to ask. And that includes ending every conversation with one question. Who else do you know that I can meet with? But think about it. After I meet with Ben and Ted, and they give me 3 names each, and I meet with the third person, I have a year's worth of people to meet with. When I walked out the door, I walked out with a file that was this thick of people I had met with and still hadn't met with yet. And so I have many strategies that came to finding my job and networking, and I talk about a lot of that in the book. But one of the strategies, besides friends, family, network, but part of it was also change my perceptions. Because my assumptions were my friends and family and people I had just worked with or people out there in the world in the same industry are going to be the ones who get me a job. I was wrong. In fact, if I had to put money on it, I would have put money on this individual that was an old boss of mine, or actually several bosses I thought I built some very strong relationships with, and said they will end up getting me a job. In fact, some of them didn't even return my calls. And I take full accountability for that because I hadn't really built a relationship after I was working with them. I was still in boss-employee relationship. I hadn't built a real mutual relationship. That's my fault, by the way. And so that's about building true relationships. So I will tell you to go back and look at some of the assumptions you have. Are you checking off a box? Are all your eggs in that basket? And are you building true mutual relationships? So one of the strategies that I do teach, besides all the things that we've just talked about here, is I went through LinkedIn alphabetically. I never got out of the E's. Got to the C's and went to a guy who I hadn't talked to in probably 20 years. Went to the University of Delaware together. We were not in the same group, but we crossed paths periodically and lived with a guy I played soccer with. So he knew of me, I knew of him. We worked at the same company, crossed paths, never worked together, knew his name, he knew mine, happened to have a LinkedIn contact. I had not built that mutual relationship. So I said alphabetically, I'm just going to send out a massive bunches of communications looking to network. And he agreed. He said, I have no openings, I apologize. No big deal, I'd just like to catch up. And he said, these 4 people used to work at your old organization, they now work at my organization, feel free to send them a note for your information. And all of a sudden, the power of secondary networks is starting to work for you. They're the ones who kept bothering me and offering me all this stuff when I lost my job. It was a secondary connection. So John sends me these 4 names. I send these notes out to 4 people. 2 returned them and 2 did not. Hey, that's 50%. I'll take that any day of the week. The 2 that sent back, one says to me, Tom, I don't have time to meet. However, I did look at your resume, and you have the qualifications for an opening that's in Falmouth. If you're willing to relocate or travel an hour and 40 minutes and submit your application, send me a note back, and I'll let the hiring manager know that I knew you from 20 years before. This was another guy that I had worked with many, many years ago. So I had a vote of confidence. I filled out the application. I sent it all in. And I said, that's fantastic. This other guy who sent me a note, he said, you and I never crossed paths. I don't even know who you are. I said, that's okay. Can we have 15 minutes together? He said, sure. And we had 15 minutes. He said, I don't know what I can do for you. And I said, well, that's okay. Tell me about the company. Tell me about the culture. Tell me about you. I'd love to know why you love what you do. And we built a relationship in 15 minutes. And he said, what can I do for you? I said, I actually have an interview. Now, there was a reputation for this company of not getting interviews. And if you do, it's 3, 4, 5 months after you submit your application. This came in a week after I sent this guy an email. He moved to the law. And so now I'm having this conversation with this guy, and he says, what can I do for you? And I said, well, I have an interview on Friday. If you can let him know, that'd be great. He said, in 15 minutes, I really appreciate the conversation we had, and I feel good that you'd be great for this company. I'll put in a good word for you. So now I have an interview on Friday, and I'm talking to a guy. I have no idea who he is. He could be a recruiter. He could be just some guy off the street. No, he was the SVP of the entire organization, but I had no idea. I didn't even know he was the hiring manager. I'm talking to the guy that's about to make the decision, and all I was doing with him was building relationships, sharing my experiences, my competencies, understanding why he likes us, and I had a networking session, not an interview. And he said, yeah, a couple other people were talking about you. I said, was it Mike and Mike? He said, yeah. I said, what'd they say? He's like, I'm not going to get into that. But he said, you know, they really gave you a vote of confidence. So I'll contact you in a week. I was like, is that a good contact? Or am I going to get a letter? I mean, help me understand this. And he ends a half hour, 30 minutes interview, and he says, short is not always good, and he said, let's talk about the U.S. soccer team. He said, I know enough about it because of the relationships that had been built, that were built exponentially from people who knew me, who knew others that were out there putting the good word, even for people I hadn't reinvented myself with, but crossed paths. I did lesson in reinventing myself with more people, but lessons in getting to those connections and still building the relationship, not job searching, but building the relationship. And so we ended up having a conversation, and I ended up getting the job. 59 days after I lost my job because of the connection. So I'm going to come out and ask you, how hard is it? What do you need to do to start official networking? What do we need to do collectively? How do you start one? How do you start a networking session? How do you prepare for it? What do you do? I'm going to say, run out of here, you take nothing more out of today except meet with someone for 30 minutes next month and make it a part of your monthly routine. How are you going to get started?
You could contact someone that you've met at a conference that you admire, or they did a presentation that you really learned a lot from, and you could reach out to them and ask them for an informational interview, or meet with them for 15 minutes, or over the phone.
Yeah. I invite all of you, find me on LinkedIn, it's Thomas B. Dowd. Facebook's under Tom Dowd Professional Development Coaching. That can be a good start. It's a good connection point from outside. Just tell you to do it. So do you set up an appointment? Do you send them an email? Are you open? What do you write in that email? Doesn't have to be an email. It really is hard, huh? Yeah.
Well, I just met somebody at the Chamber of Commerce meeting yesterday, and we introduced each other, and I said, well, yeah, I think our adult ed has worked with you in the past, and he said, no, we should really get back together again and start working together. And I said, yeah, neither one of us had anything to write with, which wasn't good, but, so he said, find me at AMI, and so I did, and he had a LinkedIn, so I contacted him, and he contacted me, and we just said, let's get together in a couple of weeks, so we're going to just get together and talk.
Now, do you have that appointment for a couple weeks from now already set up? Do you have a date and a time?
I don't have the date and the time yet. He asked me that yesterday,
Okay.
but I will. I will get a date and time.
The only thing I'll tell you to change on that is put a date and a time and really just make it easier for them so you can lock in on it.
Right.
Because if you work in the same company and you can see if somebody's occupied on their Outlook, you can do this internally through, if you're networked correctly at your company, see if someone has an appointment or if they're open. If you have that opportunity, take that route and send them an appointment. And in that appointment, it should say, Tom Dowd networking with blank. Put it completely up front of what your purpose is, what your goal is, what do you want to accomplish from this. And then within the email itself, what is your common connection if you have it? If there is a common connection, Johnny said I should meet with you and learn more about ... and then you can put that connection in here. I have an email that it's about 85% base or foundation. I copy and paste it in every single one. My name is Tom Dowd. I've been with the company for this long. Or if it's outside, I'll say, this is my connection to you. Here's what I want to accomplish, because you need a goal within that session. And then if it's an appointment, I can say, please let me know if this date and time don't work for you. When I send an appointment, you have 3 choices. Accept it, decline it, or move it. I've had hundreds move. I've only had 2 over 6 years ever decline completely. 2. Now, you might have some people... Out of what?
Out of how many, you said?
At least 6 times, 6 years times 12 months.
Are those, do you always put in your subject line or where they can see it, what the connection is? I mean, is it always a referral from somebody else?
It says Tom Dowd networking with, and then their name. And then within the body of the appointment, it says, my name is Tom Dowd, here's our connection, and here's the goal. And you need to have a goal. And what can some of those goals be? Because it's not just job seeking. Job seeking, by the way, or your next career move can be an ancillary benefit of this, but it is not your primary goal, even if you are job seeking, or even if you're looking for a change. It is not your primary goal. What are some of the goals that can take place in a networking session?
Well, actually, Jennifer and I met here, we were sitting next to each other, and I have to develop a program, something that she's already using in her job, so we decided we're gonna talk about that.
Okay.
Maybe next week we're gonna connect with each other.
Thursday at 4 o'clock. And you found that common connection. You found that you both have a goal that you can come out. It's going to make your life easier, their life easier. Maybe you want to broaden your business acumen. Maybe you want to gain some expertise in a certain field. Whatever it may be, have that goal. Maybe it's to get your hands on a PowerPoint. Maybe it's whatever it may be. Figure out what that goal is. And once you put that goal in, they have a choice. Accept it, decline it, or do something with it. Now on an email, you can go back. The problem with email is I can ignore it. I can delete it. I can kick it back to you saying, sure, I'm open, which causes you to send it back to me that says when, and you say, I don't know what works for you, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. That's why I say be a little bit more prescribed in, hey, here are 3 openings, 3 dates, 3 times. Do any of these work for you? Yes. Great. Congratulations. Call me at this number. And now it's set. You want to reduce movement. You want to reduce the amount of effort it takes and make it extremely easy on that person. And one of the reasons, it was an ancillary reason, but I went to above, usually had an admin professional. I found out they were never reading it anyway. The admin professional was. So it actually led into an introduction of here comes my elevator speech and what I want to accomplish in the call. Gave them a chance to give their elevator speech. And it's not as hard as you think.
You contact the admin, or is that your thing?
I went directly to the person, but the admin's the one that responded. So they're saying, oh, look, appointment, here's Tom. Well, I guess I'll find out. And it allowed me to build that relationship. And what I want to get out of this is that it's not as hard as you think. And I'm shaking in my boots when I'm talking to Ben. I'm shaking in my boots when I'm talking to Ted. And I don't know, they're above me. They're executives. I don't know that word. And I talk to Bob. And Bob is an expert in the field of fraud, financial fraud, worldwide industry leader. So I'm really shaking my boots. 30 minutes go by. I prepared my question, and then the questions are there. I spent 15 minutes writing up maybe 5 questions, no more than that. And what are some of the questions? It depends on what your goals are. Some might be what keep you up at night. Some might be what are your primary goals for this year. Some might be what are the key points out of this presentation. Whatever the goals are, but you can have your questions. And you may never get to any of the questions because you're just sharing elevator speeches and building relationships. Take the conversation where it goes, but be prepared. And so I'm talking to Bob, 30 minutes goes by. I said, I got to say, Bob. And all of this, by the way, is over the phone. So it doesn't have to be face-to-face. Don't get caught up in the face-to-face. It actually made me a stronger virtual manager, which actually paid dividends later on in life. And I said, Bob, I got to thank you. Oh, it was fascinating listening to all the stories you had and learning about you. And oh, this is great. Thank you so much. He said, stop. Thank you. I wouldn't have accepted this appointment if I didn't want to meet with you. And I said, oh. What an interesting point. They were willing to meet with me. And then he said, and you also have to understand, people love talking about what they do. And he became a person to me, not a manager. So after Kathy had that conversation with me and said, Tom, guess what? What's Ben doing? What's Ted doing? I said, I don't know. I picked up the phone and I called Ben, and I did not set up an appointment. I said, Ben, it's Friday afternoon, seeing if you were going to be around, hoping I'd get his voicemail. Didn't. He picks up and he says, Tom, this is great. Tell me about your new job. How'd you know I got a new job? Oh, I don't know, little birdie told me. I love my new job. I love working for Bob. I love this company. I love everything about it. This is amazing. I can't believe how this thing came about. And he starts laughing. I said, what? He said, I gave Bob your name. So I said, things are going pretty well. I'm going to call Ted. And I picked up the phone. Now, you have to understand, Ted and I, when I spoke to Ted, still shaking in my boots, he was very personable, and he says, Tom, you sound like this consummate learner. You should go get your master's. And at the time, I was in a new position, and I said, you know what? I may put that on the back burner, but I can't do it right now, and here's the reasons why, and I had so many other things I was working on, and I was really learning about other things, so I really had a legitimate excuse. And he said, oh, well, I just try to get people to stretch themselves a little bit further. In fact, I'm trying to stretch myself. I want to learn Spanish. And that's how we started our conversation of building a relationship. 6 months later, I'm talking to Ted, and he says, how's your master's? And I explained all my same reasons as to why I wasn't doing this. He said, how's your Spanish? He said, I haven't started yet. I said, okay, then we're equal. But we had built a relationship, and he remembered. And he remembered. And so I'm having this conversation with him, and he ends, and he says, listen, Tom, you made my day. I said, I made your day. And I realized networking is about building relationships and connections. When I lost my job, Ted is one of the first people that I ended up reaching out to. And the first thing he says to me is he knows I'm heavily involved in the National Speakers Association and Toastmasters, and he says to me, Tom, he went to Penn State. He said, you still haven't given that speech on Penn State yet. I know, all right, but I have plenty of time now. And I did. I wrote that Penn State speech, and I gave it 3 weeks later. And he said, so have you written a speech yet about losing your job? I said, I had to spend 2 days. Yes, of course I have. And he said, you should keep a journal. And I said, you're right. And I kind of started doing that, and that turned into the book. And he and I continue to talk to this day because it's about building relationships. I no longer work at that company, but it becomes irrelevant at that point. And the key about getting started when it comes to networking is, number one, be honest. Just be straight up front. They're going to tell you if they don't want to meet you. Don't find some underlying way to get in there. Just say, I want to network. Be prepared. Have questions to ask. 3, make sure you have a goal that's out there. It's not as hard as you think. So I had this conversation, and I was going down to Charlotte, North Carolina. And we had business meetings that were there, and we had a group of people that was meeting for a week. And I was working at the hotel gym before the very first meeting, and there was our CEO of 300,000 people in the treadmill next to me. So I go to the meeting, and they say, okay, the goals of this week is, number 1, broaden your business acumen. 2, we want you to network. And so I work out the next day, and I'm on my treadmill, I have my headset on, and he's next to me, he's got his headset on, and we're working out. And I went to my meetings, and later that night I called my wife, and I said, you'll never believe it. I was running next to our CEO of 300,000 people. And she said, did you introduce yourself to him? I said, no, you know, when I'm working out, I don't like to be bothered. When other people work out, I don't like to bother them. And she said, coward. And I said, no, really, you know, when I'm working out, headset, it's hard. Yeah. Coward. I said, fine. If the opportunity presents itself, meaning he's there, CEO will never be there 3 days in a row, we don't have our headset in, and the opportunity presents itself, I'll introduce myself to him. I get there the next morning, and I'm on the treadmill by myself. 10 minutes later, he walks in. Both have our headsets. But because I got there early, I finished my workout, I'm sitting there grabbing some water on a bench, drinking the water, and he gets off, and he stops right in front of me and does this. So I said, hi, my name is Tom Dowd. I work for you in the Maine office. And I actually had just seen him on 60 Minutes. And I said, I saw you in 60 Minutes. Thank you for what you're doing for the company. And we talked for about 5 minutes, and he was a person, too. So I went back to the group later that day, and I said, okay, remember what you said, what our goals were. And they said, yeah, broaden your business acumen and network. I said, yeah, I went straight to the top. So I want to stop here. How much time do we have? All right, we've got 6 minutes, I think. So let's toss it out there for questions or comments that you have on this whole process.
So do you normally start off trying to get 30 minutes or 15, or do you just say, I mean, do you have a common 15 or 30 that works better?
It's always been 30 to me, because what you'll find is a 2-minute elevator speech is really 10 minutes.
But do you do that first, like when you go in there? Like I know they know what your goal is, they know that when you're networking, but do you give them the elevator speech right when you go in there?
Yeah, and it depends on where you want to fit it in.
Yeah.
So I spoke to somebody and realized my primary job is my primary job, and it's hard to convince people that it really only takes 45 minutes a month, and it has changed the course of my life and career. 30 minutes, 15 minutes to prepare, 30 to do it. And so you have to figure out where it fits, and as you get more comfortable with the process, you'll start to figure it out. I spoke to a guy by the name of Chris yesterday, and for this organization I'm in right now, I found out that they did not have Toastmasters formally within their organization. Well, I offered it up and talked to some people in HR and said, I'm willing to help bring it into the organization if you want. The guy's like, well, is your goal to start it and found it, or to go from Maine to Florida? I said, go to Maine to Florida. He's like, well, I'm glad you think big. He said, but I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. And that was another networking session. A day later, I get an email back from this guy who's his boss, who says, by the way, I heard you want to start Toastmasters. Here's a resource being thrown your way. She's going to organize it. You have to promise to partner with it, and let's roll. Funding and everything. Resources and everything. When's that ever? And I'm some guy that just started with them in August. And so I said, opportunity, 2 months later, let me meet with him and give him an update on the progress of our Toastmasters Club and found it and talk about this. And so he kind of had an idea of who I was, kind of. But he gets on and we start talking about Toastmasters. And I said, I'd love to hear more about how you joined the organization. And he jumped in. I said, you want to hear my elevator speech? And it became this joke because, hey, it's a speech, it's Toastmasters, let's roll. And so I was able to slip it in. Earlier ones I start with, because it's really selfless. It needs to truly, it shouldn't be a facade. It needs to truly be about them. So my elevator speech brings me along for the ride. And it's an elevator speech that's adaptable. It's a 2-minute up to a 15-minute version, depending on what you want. But the elevator speech is, and you have to be, this is your opportunity to be clear and concise and not make it about you. So I might say, instead of pointing out everything I've done over the last 23 years, I spent the first 18 years in call centers, and then I started to manage, and I got involved in projects, and then risk management, and I go down that path. I make it 2 minutes, and then the rest becomes about him or her. And so you really have to time it appropriately, but it's okay. There isn't a prescription that says you have 10 minutes, they have 10 minutes, and then you talk about the rest. You have to go with the flow, but when you get comfortable and you have all control of the conversation, believe it or not, to move it in certain directions, you can get some things out of it if you do it right. And you learn, you'll make a ton of mistakes, but isn't that the beauty of doing it? Those mistakes will actually come back and help you later on. In fact, it may show some of that vulnerability that people would appreciate, that you've learned from your mistakes. I share my mistakes with others on these mentoring sessions, or it's my rotational mentor is really what it has turned into. So it's a great question. Just at the time.
How do you stay organized to follow up with the individuals? So what's your timeline for that? Because I actually did an informational interview like 2 years ago, and she'd love to when you're in Minneapolis, connect with me if you're over here. And I was actually there in March, but then I was like, oh, it's been over a year. How do you stay in context so that it's not too long to the point that then you're like, oh, that would be kind of awkward. It's like, hey, I'm here. Did you still want to meet up?
My thought is don't ever say it to me unless you mean it. I'm a true believer of that, because if they want to ignore it, they will. Give them the chance. You have to put it on their table and give them the choice to say no. But I really have no timeline. In fact, when you're without a job, 20 years isn't too long. and so you reach out to people that I've reinvented. The person I reinvented myself with, it had been 4 years since I had a conversation with that individual. And that's what I said, is it's been too long. Let's meet. I've had people say, next time you're in New Jersey, let's catch up. As soon as they say that, they're actually on my list. And I have a New Jersey list, I have a Lewiston list, because we have offices there, I have a Falmouth list, I have a list, so I start figuring out when I'm there, if I can fit you in, I'm going to. It starts with, can I fit you in my schedule, and then I'll throw to them, hey, I'm going to be here during this time, I'm going to be there. No timeline should ever be on it. And I'm not at a point with, okay, I met with Ben and Ted, so they are on this timeline. 6 months from now, I'm going to do it. But where it comes into play, is anyone on LinkedIn? Okay. You get those birthday reminders. You get the they just changed jobs reminder or an anniversary reminder. Why do they do that? It's to prompt you to have a conversation with them. So if I see someone in the newspaper, or I'll see somebody in the news, or I'll see something change on LinkedIn, I do respond to those. Not on all the birthday ones. But I do, if they've changed jobs, and LinkedIn's kind of funky. If you just update something, it shows that you got a new job. So you have to really know if they changed jobs or something, or if it's worth congratulating them on. But send them a note. And I actually like to skip out of the congratulations piece so everyone can see it. I send them a private message of, what's going on. I haven't talked to, there's this person who works in Canada. He used to work for me, and great individual. It's probably been a year plus since we've been in last contact. Actually, when I lost my job, I sent her a note, hey, anything over in yours? But I have speaking engagement in Canada. When I hear Canada, I think of her, and I said, what's key? And I sent her a note. And it was a 3-liner. I said, just looking to see how you're doing with going up to Canada, and I was just thinking. That's all that it said. I would love to hear what's going on here. She sends me a note back, and things are going well. She loves her job. Here's what's happening. And sends me a whole paragraph. Oh, I'm so glad you made my day. And that's the connection. It doesn't always have to be a phone call. I haven't talked to my best friend in 6 months. We're not fighting. But if you have a true relationship with someone, you don't have to worry about the timeline. Or if you don't have a relationship with someone, it's your chance to recreate. And there's a great book out there, not mine. Okay, maybe. But Adam Grant wrote a book. It's called Give and Take. It is an awe-inspiring, life-changing book. And what I mean by it talks about givers and takers. And it really talks about dormant contacts. They're dormant only if you allow them to be, or they become non-productive for some people because they need them for sales or certain things. But the dormancy is your accountability. So do something about it. And if you feel like you're really losing touch with someone, or those people that I made assumptions, and I made very poor assumptions about, I've reached back out to them. And there are certain people that I still stay connected with. I actually have pop-ups because I can't remember anything. But the pop-ups say, hey, have you called Kim yet? And it pops up once a month or once a quarter. Call Kat. And simply all that it says. And I pick up the phone and call him. I had this guy, and I saw that he had changed his job, and I sent him a note. And he never returned it. But he's a good guy, and I know he doesn't manage his time well, and I know that from our relationship. And I sent him another note. And another month goes by, and I said, I'm just wishing you well in your new job. Hope it's going well. And he sends me a note back saying, please don't give up on me. You know how poor my time management is. But I love my new job, and here's what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. And so it's about that true relationship. And there's going to be ones that just kind of fade off. And they will. And you know what? That's okay. Or there's going to be people that fade off that will come back to you when you need them, or more importantly, when they need you. Because things get forgotten, and names get forgotten. Make yourself relevant enough that people remember you, or if you're ever forgotten, that you have a strong enough relationship that the bond can pay off for you later on. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.